Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Sixth Family, The Collapse of the New York Mafia and the Rise of Vito Rizzuto, by Lee Lamothe and Adrian Humphreys. Narrated by Danny Campbell. Question: How many organized crime families are there in New York? Answer: 5. Question: What are the names of the 5 New York crime families? Answer: Lucchese, Gambino, Colombo, and the Genovese. Question: And what's the 5th family? Answer: Us, the Bonanno family. Testimony of Salvatore Good-Looking Sal Vitale, former underboss of the Bonanno Mafia family, United States Courthouse, Brooklyn, New York, June 28, 2004. For the past 25 years, Montreal has been the key that turns the lock of America. The one holding that key becomes the pinnacle. The Rizzuto family was able to promise a transport between the mafias of Europe and the Mafia of America. Riches were promised for all. A leading anti-mafia investigator with the Carabinieri, Italy's federal police force, 2006. Prologue. Brooklyn, May 5, 1981. "Don't anybody move. This is a hold-up." The words were clear despite the muffling effect of a woolen ski mask pulled down over the long, thin face of Vito Rizzuto, a 35-year-old Sicilian who called Canada's French-speaking city of Montreal his home. Vito was slumming it in New York City this day, more accustomed as he was to receiving nods of respect in Canada and Sicily as the son of a powerful mafioso, or relaxing on the coast of Venezuela, where his family controlled massive drug trafficking interests. On May 5, 1981, Vito found himself bursting from a closet in a run-down Brooklyn social club, waving a pistol and shouting out "stick 'em up" cliches. It was a casually dressed but powerful group of men who suddenly stopped their chatter and, startled by the sudden appearance of masked and armed men, looked up at Vito and 3 colleagues as they emerged from the narrow confines of the darkened closet. Gathered before them were the top men in the Bonanno Mafia family, perhaps the most deadly and storied of New York City's notorious 5 families, which between them control much of the continent's underworld. The Bonanno captains, each a leader of crooks operating under the family's banner, had been summoned to an administrative meeting by Joseph Massino, a senior Bonanno captain often called Big Joey by his mob colleagues, a nod at first to his substantial girth and later to his position of power. Officially, peace was the sole item on the meeting's agenda, talks meant to mend an unseemly rift between factions within the family that had grown from quiet disdain to open hostility and brought it to the brink of out-and-out warfare. Among those in the social club feeling particularly uncomfortable were 3 leading captains who formed the core of opposition to Joseph Massino within the family: Alphonse Sunny Red Indelicato, Dominic Big Trini Trinchera, and Philip Philly Lucky Giacone. Other gangsters milled about uneasily with them. Earlier, before the guests started trickling into the private 2-story Brooklyn club, Vito Rizzuto had arrived to make dark preparations with Massino and Salvatore Vitale, a slender New York mobster known as Good-Looking Sal. At the time, Vitale was a mere mob associate, but he would go on to become the underboss, the second most powerful position in a mafia family. Vito allegedly brought with him from Montreal 2 close mob friends of his own, Emanuele Ragusa, whose daughter would later marry Vito's son, and a veteran gangster identified by informants only as the old-timer, who was likely a Rizzuto relative with ties to the New York underworld. The club was small and simply laid out. Utility was chosen over decor for such private mob moments. Visitors passed through a narrow foyer into an unadorned room with a cloakroom to one side and stairs leading up to an area that was equipped to handle catering, but in fact primarily used to host a modest gambling racket by the club's ownership group. This group included Salvatore "Sammy Bull" Gravano, who would soon become underboss of the Gambino family under its notorious boss John Gotti, and later a spectacular mob turncoat. The minute I walked into the club in the foyer, Vito, Emanuele, and the old-timer, we were issued the weapons, told to have ski masks that we'd put on in a closet in a coat room, said Vitale. Vito and Ragusa took pistols and were appointed lead shooters. Vitale was handed a heavy-duty machine gun, what he called a grease gun, because it blasted automatic gunfire, and the old-timer suitably went old school, taking a sawed-off shotgun. Playing around with his new toy, Vitale accidentally squeezed the trigger, wildly spraying bullets around the club. "Don't shoot unless you have to," Massino scolded him. "I don't want bullets flying all over the place." Even mobsters get the jitters. We were in the closet. We all had our weapons loaded. We sat there and waited for the doorbell to ring, said Vitale. We left the door open a smidge to look out. The ringing of the bell at the club's entrance signaled the arrival of the first of the invited guests. Vito crouched low, peeking out from his vantage point. Through the swelling crowd and loud chatter from tough men all accustomed to having their say, Vito kept his eyes on one man, Gerlando Sciascia, a fellow Sicilian who was a long-time Rizzuto family friend. Sciascia was easy to pick out because of his thick silver hair, brushed back off his forehead in a bouffant hairdo that any aging Hollywood hunk would envy. Everyone in the room knew Sciascia. The Americans called him George from Canada because he was Montreal's representative in New York, while the Canadians simply stuck with George. Breathing deeply beneath his mask, Vito watched for the secret signal that would draw him from the closet, a signal that came when Sciascia slowly ran the fingers of his lean right hand through the silver hair on the left side of his head. That simple act of preening brought mayhem to the social club and radically changed the balance of power. This was not about robbery, despite Vito's words when he confronted the gangsters. Nothing would be taken but 3 lives and the rights to an underworld throne. Vito led the way, said Vitale, who was the last to scramble out of the closet. While Vito and Ragusa pointed their guns, Vitale and the old-timer jogged past them to block the club's exit. Big Trini, one of the rebellious captains, seemed the first to realize they had been set up. Bellowing loudly, he threw his full 300 pounds headlong at Vito, who reacted by firing his pistol, making Big Trini the first to die, although his flab-fueled momentum kept his body hurtling forward while other bullets pounded into him. Philly Lucky appeared to surrender, placing himself against a wall, his hands stretched out. His submission was in vain. Peppered with bullets, he slid to the floor, dying from multiple bullet wounds to his head and chest. Sonny Red turned on the heels of his brown cowboy boots and made a go at fleeing. In his bright orange T-shirt, however, he was an easy target. A shot to the back sliced through his backbone and burst out his chest. A second bullet hit him in his left side and whistled under the skin across the length of his rib cage before breaking through the flesh on his other flank. With its momentum suddenly sapped, the battered .38 caliber slug could not even pierce the fabric of his shirt a second time, falling instead into its blood-soaked folds. Sonny Red stumbled to the floor. Sciascia, anxious to join the fray, pulled out a pistol he had tucked in the back of his pants, pointed it down at the struggling gangster, and fired it once into his left ear. The bullet tore downward through Sonny's head, whipped out through his right cheek, and grazed his right shoulder before slamming into the floor. The rebellion was over. When the gunfire stopped, all the survivors except Massino and Vitale raced out of the club. The only one standing in the room other than the 3 dead bodies was Joseph Massino, an amazed Vitale said, recalling the scene. Everybody else was gone. Time has not been kind to those involved in the murder of the three captains, an act that has since become a rich part of popular lore, forming the core of a multitude of trials and police investigations, and being colorfully recreated and immortalized on film in the Hollywood movie Donnie Brasco. Several of the notorious men involved would later be imprisoned, likely for the rest of their lives. Others would go on to shatter their oath of omerta, the Mafia's vow of silence, and cooperate with government agents to far-reaching effect. Still others would themselves be killed in the continuing gangland intrigue. One would die in a plane crash, and another under even more unusual circumstances, hanging face to face with his son, both officially declared to have committed suicide. One by one, each of them would fall, at the wrong end of a gun, through life imprisonment or in a freak accident. All but one. Vito Rizzuto is the last man standing. The significant factor surrounding these murders is that Vito Rizzuto, Nick Rizzuto's son, is suspected of being involved, concludes a confidential FBI report from 1985. Almost prescient, as it was written 20 years before there were informants filling in the extensive blanks of what authorities knew of the mysterious murders. The same report outlines with some amazement the Rizzuto family's central role as a hub for extensive criminal interests in America, Italy, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Venezuela, France, and Switzerland, noting Vito's and his father's relationships with some of the world's most significant drug barons. More recent investigations would add China, Saudi Arabia, Cuba, Haiti, Belize, Bahamas, Aruba, Dominican Republic, and Panama to the list of the family's international interests. 2 decades ago, FBI special agents wrote with a growing sense of alarm that Vito, a shadowy mob figure based in Canada, was not only trusted to carry out this most sensitive bit of internal Bonanno business, but also operated with seeming autonomy and impunity around the world. Compared to what New York-based authorities were used to looking at, largely homegrown gangsters lording it over turf they could drive across in a leisurely afternoon, the breadth of geography and intertwining connections of the Rizzuto organization surprised even seasoned investigators. Within the blood-splattered walls of the Brooklyn Social Club, the sixth family had emerged with a deafening crescendo. The Canadian connection had been made. The New York mob had gotten a taste of a gangster who would eventually eclipse them all. This is the story of a war, of a family, and of a man. It documents a hard struggle for the biggest prize in crime, the New York drug market. At the same time, it reveals the hidden history of the family that helped wage and win that war. Finally, it tells the story of the man who heads that family and how he runs the family business, an enterprise that grew within 3 generations from a small operation in rural Sicily to a mammoth North American-based crime corporation with grasping hands reaching around the globe. Vito Rizzuto is a man of many parts. He is the product of a strong family from a tough place. Without the drugs and the murders, the story of the sixth family would be an illustrious and celebrated tale of success, drive, and ambition, a story of tradition, culture, love, and hate. But the story cannot be told without noting the movement of massive quantities of drugs and the copious murders, because the vast, alarmingly successful global operation that the sixth family built, expanded, and assiduously protects, is a franchise for drugs. Heroin at the outset, then cocaine, hashish, ecstasy, whatever the market demands, whatever turns a profit. This book, however, is not meant to be a tawdry account of the day-to-day life of a gangster, but rather a probing and lasting examination of a criminal dynasty that made Rizzuto one of the most important names in the world of crime. The sixth family is as much a genuine family as it is an organization. A careful examination of the major players shows that blood ties and marital links are an integral part of its operation. It grows slowly and carefully, often absorbing new members when an acolyte, or one of their children, marries a child or sibling of another key operational player, suggesting either the insular nature of the families or a crafty, purposeful plan. The result is a family tree that in its roots and in many of its branches closely mirrors police reports on important criminal networks. It is a hallmark that distinguishes the Sixth Family from the Five Families of New York, which recruit neighborhood crooks based on a pattern of high-paying scores, a materialistic standard of loyalty that has proven to be a weak foundation. The Sixth Family is not a term the organization uses to describe itself. Rather, it is a name coined by the authors of this book to describe the network of clans that has gelled around the Rizzuto organization, a term chosen to highlight both the close ties between its members and its place in the underworld alongside the Five Families of New York City. The Sixth Family is a blend of unvarnished capitalism and globalization, tempered only by loyalty and a deep criminal culture more than a century old, although it is bound more by its own personal relationships than by any archaic mafia rituals. The Sixth Family is a tight web of drug-trafficking clans. Instead of maintaining a geographic base in Sicily, like traditional mafia families, they consider the globe their village. Instead of beating a profit out of the streets of New York, like many of their mafia confederates, they make the world their marketplace. While New Yorkers retain memories of colorful mobsters such as John Gotti, Chicago clings to the legend of Al Capone, and Montreal still reminisces about its old godfather, Vic Catroni. The entire world can claim the Sixth Family, for the Sixth Family lays claim to the world. Chapter 1. Agrigento Province, Sicily, 2006. A narrow road carved from the chalky hills of southern Sicily cuts north at Montalegro from the coastal highway that links the major cities of Agrigento and Trapani. As the road bends and twists its way some 7 miles north and 600 feet up, sun-bleached vistas alternately rise and fall from the sides of the pavement. Scrub brush and thin bunches of long green grass poke out of dusty soil that clings tenuously to rocky, mountainous hilltops. An occasional farmhouse dots the land, set behind hard-won fields of grapevines and hardy crops such as pistachio trees, olive groves, and ancient almond orchards. Enchanting, tranquil, rustic. A host of adjectives can describe such old-world scenes. And on a map, Cattolica Iraclia looks like any one of the hundreds of hilltop villages that define Italy's island of Sicily. On the outskirts of town as the road flattens, a recently erected sign comes into view, offering travelers hospitality in 3 languages: Benvenuti, Willkommen, and Welcome to Cattolica Iraclia. The sign then lists the location and phone numbers of the Carabinieri, the federal police force, and the Polizia Municipale, the local police detachment. Around a bend set on a small traffic island there is another sign announcing the town. This sign is rusted, pockmarked, and marred with graffiti, suggesting a certain malaise has set in, an idea reinforced by the absence among the tall orange-tiled houses of the low cranes and scaffolding that signal new construction and remodeling in most Sicilian towns. The inordinate number of newer high-end automobiles navigating the narrow streets, with BMW the favorite and Alfa Romeo not far behind, belies the appearance of Cattolica Iraclia as a poor village with few prospects. Small-town Sicily is known to hospitably welcome the children and grandchildren of émigrés to the Americas who make a pilgrimage back to the old country to see where their ancestors came from and to visit the graves of known and unknown relatives. In Sicilian terms, to respect the tradition of sangue de me sangue, blood of my blood. In Cattolica Heraclea, however, responses to questions about how old the church is or how to get to the cemetery are not met with a smile and a dizzying monologue about the town. Despite the welcoming roadside sign, answers provided to strangers are abrupt and precise. Instead of the usual friendly inquisitiveness about one's family, when they left and where they went, you are likely to be followed by a sinister-looking man in one of those BMWs, a person to be encountered 3 or 4 more times as you walk among the graves of the town cemetery, allowing you to leave his sight only when you reach the town limits. The residents' suspicions probably spring from the simple fact that the town and its surrounding province of Agrigento have, over several decades, given the world some of its most rapacious drug-trafficking clans. Cattolica Heraclea is a community of some 6,000 people that is missed by a wide margin on each side by the twin highways and rail lines connecting the cities of Palermo and Agrigento, infrastructures that look as if they have made considerable effort to bend around the town. This no doubt contributes to the rarity of tourists, a fact that speaks to the absence of hotels. It is as if the people just wish to be left alone. That is not to say the town is without its visual charm. The old town hall, for instance, and the original Borsellino Palace, built in 1764, the town's clock tower, the powerful architectural settlement of the fascist-era Palazzo Municipale, and the mother church dedicated to the Holy Spirit with its lofty bell tower and double-decker stone columns are pleasing marvels. Another church of some beauty is La Chiesa della Madonna del Rosario, the Church of the Madonna of the Rosary. It is a testament to the religious roots of a town named for its faith, Cattolica is Italian for Catholic, that a village of such size would have so many churches. The Chiesa del Rosario, as it is commonly known, features an imposing stone facade broken only by a circular window set with a stained glass portrait of the Virgin Mary praying over the infant Jesus. Built in 1638 and topped by 3 bells in an open tower, the formidable exterior of the church gives way to a surprisingly bright nave inside, where rows of wooden pews lead to a sunlit apse and intricately carved altar. Parishioners still gather in this venerable church that casts its wide shadow over Via Ospedale, a narrow street near the center of Cattolica Heraclea. In modest homes along Via Ospedale, a short, dead-end street, the nucleus of the 6th family began to form. It was in a house here that Vito Rizzuto was born on February 18, 1924. And it was here also that Niccolo would marry and would welcome the birth of his first child, a son. Born on February 21, 1946, that beloved bambino would be called Vito, in honor of Niccolo's long-dead father, a man who gave Niccolo his start in life as well as a criminal pedigree, but a father he would never personally know. Niccolo Rizzuto's father, Vito, was born to Niccolo Rizzuto and Giuseppa Mara on April 12, 1901, and grew up in Cattolica Heraclea. And just as the names would be handed down through the ages, with the Vito Rizzuto of today being the son of Niccolo, who is the son of Vito, who is the son of Niccolo, a desire to move to the New World also extended through the generations. Cattolica Heraclea, Sicily, 1924. The previous generation's Vito Rizzuto was slim and fit, standing 5'6" with a strong jaw, brown eyes, a full head of chestnut-colored hair, and a modest scar low on the left side of his forehead. He decided to leave Cattolica Heraclea in 1924. Rizzuto had moved into a home on Via Ospedale in 1919, months after the close of the First World War. He appears to have then completed a post-war stint in the Italian army, but even there he could not resist his outlaw urgings. On June 23, 1921, he was sentenced by the military tribunal of Rome to 2 months incarceration in a military jail for theft. At the age of 22, on March 9, 1923, he married Maria Renda, a family friend, relative, and neighbor who was 3 years his senior. Just 10 months before he left Sicily, never to return, he and Maria had their first and only child, Niccolo. There was no doubt sadness and uncertainty at leaving his young family behind, but both husband and wife must have taken some comfort in knowing that the other would remain among family despite their separation. Maria Renda and baby Niccolo would live on the same short street, perhaps in the same house as the Rizzutos. For her part, Maria knew that her husband was leaving Sicily accompanied by her brother, Calogero Renda. Calogero was 2 inches shorter and a year younger than Rizzuto. With a darker complexion and a mole on his left cheek, Calogero appeared to be a man of some means. He owned fashionable clothes and had the ability to travel internationally. On February 1, 1923, police in Agrigento issued him a passport, number 126/241107, allowing him to travel to Buenos Aires, Argentina. Calogero also lived on Via Ospedale in Cattolica Heraclea with his mother, Grazia Spinella. By 1924, his father, Paolo Renda, was already dead. Vito Rizzuto and Calogero Renda planned their departure during extraordinary times in Italy. Benito Mussolini, the fascist leader, was turning the crisis over the murder of socialist leader Giacomo Matteotti, his most potent political rival, into an opportunity. Matteotti disappeared in June 1924 as he was delivering withering denunciations of Mussolini. A month later, Matteotti's decomposing body was found in a shallow grave outside Rome. The political storm that followed this obvious assassination at the hands of the fascists weakened Mussolini, and for months there was doubt about his ability to retain power. In December, he promised to reconvene Parliament after Christmas to discuss electoral reform. In the new year, instead of concessions, however, Mussolini seized full dictatorial powers. It was at that very time of political uncertainty that Rizzuto, Renda, and 4 close friends planned their departure, heading north past Rome. By December 1924, they had crossed the border into France. A few days after arriving in Boulogne-sur-Mer, a northern port city near Calais on the English Channel, the 6 friends bought third-class tickets for passage to America. It was a meandering trip, more a tourist cruise than an immigrant steamer. The SS Edam left Rotterdam, its home port with the Holland-America line, and stopped in Boulogne-sur-Mer on December 14, 1924, to collect Rizzuto and his pals before crossing the Atlantic over Christmas and New Year's. The ship arrived in Havana, Cuba, on January 5, 1925, and then left for Tampico, Mexico, arriving there on January 16th, before finally heading to America. It was a suspiciously unusual and expensive route for supposedly simple laborers from rural Sicily immigrating to America. Rizzuto and Renda, however, seemed to have unusual reasons. New Orleans, January 19, 1925. When the SS Edam drew into port at New Orleans, Louisiana, U.S. immigration officials were far more concerned with 2 Cuban stowaways who had crept aboard the ship in Havana than with Vito Rizzuto and his entourage, all of whom presented American officials with the required paperwork and visas. The rules for immigrants from Italy had recently changed, as the United States grew increasingly concerned about the continuing waves of new arrivals. As of July 1, 1924, a quota system was imposed on Italian immigrants, sharply limiting the number that could legally enter America. Every Italian émigré needed an immigrant quota visa issued prior to their departure by the U.S. State Department. As Vito Rizzuto led his small group off the SS Edam, Immigration Inspector J.W. McVeigh examined the quota visas and identity papers for each of them. Giving his occupation as laborer and falsely declaring himself to be single, Rizzuto listed his next of kin as his father, Niccolo, in Cato.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?